Catholic fans, good day. Our live finale is now 72% sold out. I hope you'll join us the weekend of March the 14th for the Catholic live finale plus walking tours. You can get tickets to one or both online right now at Catholic.com. Tickets are going fast, so don't delay. All right, enjoy the episode. There have been lots of bloody summers in Atlanta's history, but one of them was, by far, the worst, and there isn't a close second. By 1864, America was immersed in its greatest test since it had declared independence from England nearly a century before. The young nation's first civil war had grown into a full-blown crisis. The conflict pitted the American North versus the seceding American South. Hundreds of thousands of Americans had already been killed, and the war was still waging. And while the struggle for victory tilted back and forth, there still remained one stubborn problem for Union forces: Atlanta. Over time, Atlanta became the lifeline of the Confederacy. Though it wasn't the Confederate capital, that was to the east in Richmond, Virginia, Atlanta was the crucial manufacturing and industrial center of the Southern cause. Once cut off from Northern industry, the Confederacy was forced to manufacture all its own war supplies. As a major railroad hub situated deep in the heart of the South, the city of Atlanta was perfectly positioned to meet many of these needs. So when the Civil War began, Atlanta's factories roared to life, working overtime to supply the Confederate fighting force. Textile mills buzzed day and night to produce clothing for the soldiers. Uniforms, trousers, and boots. They also produced tents and blankets. Still other industrial sites around the city churned out Confederate war machines, ammunition, muskets, and cannons. During the war, the New York Times said that Atlanta was, quote, the workshop, the granary, the storehouse, and the arsenal of the Confederacy, end quote. Atlanta's most crucial facility, however, was the Atlanta Rolling Mill. In 1858, the Atlanta Rolling Mill was constructed on a rural plot of land east of downtown. When it opened, it was one of the few factories in the South that could produce iron rail, the key ingredient to connecting American cities and fueling the nation's expansion into new territories. During the Civil War, however, the Atlanta Rolling Mill became the Confederate Rolling Mill, as the factory's output shifted towards the growing needs of the Confederacy. During that time, it produced iron rail, cannons, and sheets of iron cladding for the ships of the Confederate Navy. The South was fighting for its life to preserve the institution of slavery, and it was largely Atlanta's job to fuel that fight. By 1864, American forces from the North were pushing deeper and deeper into the seceded states. Leading their cause was General William Tecumseh Sherman. While he'd already taken several big Southern cities, Atlanta was the crown jewel. He knew that if he could take Atlanta, he could destroy Confederate supply lines, thereby severing outlying regiments from the vital resources they needed to keep fighting. So in the summer of 1864, General Sherman finally set his full attention on taking Atlanta. The siege began in July of that year, the Battle of Atlanta. 74,000 American and Confederate troops clashed east of downtown in an area of Atlanta that would eventually become Inman Park. The Battle of Atlanta was brutal and bloody, and when the dust settled, there were 12,000 casualties, with most of them coming at the expense of the Confederacy. Though devastating, Confederate troops continued their resistance, giving all they had to defend the city throughout the summer. Meanwhile, Union forces continued to shell downtown Atlanta, and civilians went to sleep each night to the sound of exploding mortars and gunfire in the distance. In a panic, the governor of Georgia fired off a desperate telegram to Jefferson Davis, the president of the seceded states. He wrote this: I need not call your attention to the fact that this place is to the Confederacy almost as important as the heart is to the human body. Despite the governor's plea for reinforcements, by the end of August, the heart of the Confederacy was slowing down. Hope began to fade, and the exhausted Confederate resistance was on fumes. Though he'd done everything he could to keep Atlanta from falling to Union troops, Confederate Lieutenant General John Hood was running out of options. As Sherman's troops breached the final lines of defense, they began their march directly into the heart of Atlanta, and General Hood was faced with a brutal reality. If Confederate forces abandoned the city altogether, the Confederate rolling mill would fall into the hands of the Union. This meant that this massive factory that had been churning out Confederate weapons of war could now be used to fuel the American war effort. And it was this dilemma that caused General Hood to make one of the most dramatic decisions of the Civil War. Instead of allowing the Confederate rolling mill to fall into the hands of Northern forces, Hood decided to blow it up. On the night of September 1st, 1864, a detachment of Confederate troops on horseback rode through the darkness to the Confederate rolling mill. Several idle trains were parked next to the mill. They were loaded down with tons of highly explosive munitions. With torches in hand, the men quietly set fire to several of the boxcars and galloped away as quickly as possible. As they rode off into the darkness, a massive detonation, one of the largest explosions ever to occur on American soil, thundered behind them. The concussion flattened everything within a quarter mile. It was reported that even General Sherman himself, stationed 23 miles from the rolling mill, heard the blast. The parked train boxcars burst into flames, rising into a towering inferno that eventually consumed the entire mill compound. The Confederacy's war machine manufactory was no more. When the sun rose the next day, residents near the site of the Confederate rolling mill woke to the sight of a blackened and mangled parcel of scorched earth. The thriving steel mill was leveled. The rolling green hills of grass and trees surrounding the factory had been replaced by a smoking, charred, dystopian hellscape. This plot of land, once buzzing with the life of commerce and industry, now looked like the desolate surface of an alien planet. The destruction of the Confederate rolling mill was Atlanta's last gasp. With Confederate forces on the run, Sherman himself marched on the city and set up camp with his men in downtown Atlanta. He stayed there for nearly 2 months before beginning his march east to Savannah. But before he left, of course, he ordered Atlanta, the once proud heart of the rebel cause, to be torched. Soldiers rode from building to building, setting fire to both military and civilian structures alike. More than 3,000 buildings went up in smoke as the South's grandest city was reduced to rubble. After Sherman's troops burned Atlanta, a sergeant from Indiana offered some commentary in his private journal. Here's what he said. The entire city was destroyed, but for a few occupied houses. It reminds me of the destruction of Babylon, because of the wickedness of her people. Because of the wickedness of her people. The fall of Atlanta proved to be a pivotal battle in the Civil War. The next year, 1865, the war came to an end as rebel forces in the South finally accepted defeat. So why am I talking about what happened in Atlanta in 1864? Well, I'll tell you. Because 16 years after General Hood blew it up, the scorched site of the Confederate rolling mill went up for sale. Located on the eastern edge of the city and next to the graveyard where thousands of dead had been buried after the Battle of Atlanta, it wasn't exactly a pleasant place in the minds of most Atlantans. This cursed land had borne witness to the humiliation of the South's bravest fighting men. No one wanted the land haunted by the ghosts of Confederate industry. Well, not no one. The former site of the Confederate rolling mill eventually caught the eye of at least one enterprising immigrant, a once orphaned German-Jewish immigrant to be exact. In 1880, Jacob Elsis had been shopping around Atlanta for a site adequate to house his new cotton mill when he realized he could get this battle-scarred land outside of town for a good price. He moved quickly, making his offer and closing the deal. And so from the ashes of the Confederate War Foundry, a new enterprise began to rise, a great factory that would become the Fulton Bag and Cotton Mill. And in the shadow of that factory, a village would rise too, on this same tract of land with a history considered messy at best and downright wicked at worst. But as the mill grew and thrived, the same could not be said of those living in the mill village. And by 1914, Cabbagetown, a community built atop the soil of a lost Confederate cause, began to feel like a lost cause of its own. You're listening to episode 19 of Catlick. Let us have justice. It's May of 1914, month number 41 of our story. Disgruntled workers at the Fulton Bag and Cotton Mill in Atlanta have voted to walk off the job. Their reasons for striking were clear: low pay, an unfair work contract, a draconian fining system, unreasonably long hours, child labor, and horrendous conditions in the mill village. So, on May the 20th, it began. Workers arrived at 6 a.m. for their normal workday, but by 9 a.m., the machines began going quiet as one by one, workers walked away from their posts and out into the streets of Cabbagetown. Though the numbers are debated, our best estimate is that about 200 workers walked off the job on the first day of the strike. Remember, at this time, there are over 1,000 jobs at the mill, so while 200 might seem like a lot, it was hardly enough to bring the mill to a grinding halt. Recruiting more workers to the union cause would be crucial. When the strike began, establishing highly visible picket lines was an immediate priority. Picketers stationed themselves at various entry points around the mill itself, but also at highly trafficked locations around Atlanta. The early goal was to be as visible as possible, to stir up as much public sympathy as possible. Daily strike meetings were also held at the Odd Fellows building down on Auburn Avenue, about a half a mile from the mill. Now, the fact that the strikers met at the Odd Fellows building was quite significant. The Atlanta chapter of the Grand Order of Odd Fellows had opened their beautiful new building just a year before. Conceived of and constructed by black businessmen, it was one of the first office buildings in Atlanta to cater to the black community. In a city deeply divided along racial lines, it was no small matter that the white workers of the Fulton Bag strike were allowed to meet in the Odd Fellows building. This was an early sign of the broad support the strike would gain. FYI, the Odd Fellows building is still standing today down on Auburn Avenue, and it was restored to its full early 20th century glory back in the 1980s. Check it out if you're in the area. In the early days of the strike, its two primary leaders were Charles Mills and Ola Delight Smith. I introduced you to Miles in the last episode, and you'll remember that he'd led several successful efforts to unionize workers in the North. He was a seasoned labor leader with the chops to hang with anti-union industrial tycoons. His partner was an Atlanta local named Ola Delight Smith. If I had to vote for a most colorful character in all of Catlick, it would be Ola Delight Smith. We don't have many photos of her, but the best one we do have shows her wearing all black, a long black dress and an enormous black hat with black feathers billowing out of the top of it. In the photo, her expression is quite severe, the look of a person who is all business. And Ola Delight Smith was all business. Historian Gary Fink describes her as a, quote, human whirlwind of action, end quote. Smith got her start as a telegrapher in Birmingham, Alabama. After that, she moved to Gainesville, Georgia, and then eventually to Atlanta. She joined several telegrapher unions and recruited others to join her. This eventually cost her her job. She took on other odd jobs to make ends meet and began writing for local and national labor journals. In her writing, her passion as a staunch activist was evident as she railed against child labor and advocated for women's rights. But she was also known for some more controversial behaviors. In a time when women still didn't have the right to vote, females were expected to be quiet, submissive, and ladylike. Well, Ola Delight Smith was anything but. She transgressed nearly every societal norm for how a woman should act. For one, she enjoyed beer and would often kick back with the boys to down a pint or 10. Furthermore, at least on one occasion, she got into an altercation with a man and knocked him out using brass knuckles. Ola Delight Smith lived her life the way she led her activism. Passionate, full throttle, unapologetic. So when she got the call to help lead the strike efforts at Fulton Bag, she was likely thrilled. Has a book ever stuck with you, like really stuck with you? A couple years ago, I listened to Kevin Kelly's audiobook called Inevitable: Understanding the 12 Technological Forces That Will Shape Our Future. I remember listening to it in the car while I was driving up to Kentucky to visit my mom for Christmas. To this day, I still think about the insights from that book. Well, that whole experience was made possible by Audible.com. If you're like me, it seems like it's getting harder and harder to find time to read books. Well, this is where Audible comes in. They've got thousands of titles, plus other great content like podcasts, guided wellness programs, theatrical performances, A-list comedy, and exclusive Audible originals you won't find anywhere else. Plus, the Audible app is pretty awesome. It's free, it can be easily downloaded to any tablet or smartphone, and it allows you to listen to your audiobooks even when you're offline. Audible.com is a proud sponsor of episode 19 of Catlick, and they'd like to offer Catlick listeners a free audiobook. To claim yours, just visit audible.com/Catlick or text the word Catlick to 500-500. Check it out today. Charles Miles and Ola Delight Smith, with funding from the United Textile Workers, made some important moves early in the strike. First, they began reaching out to various groups around Atlanta that might be sympathetic to their cause. They realized the importance of winning the PR battle. Second, they established a commissary for the striking workers. The commissary was erected right in the shadow of the mill, off present-day Tennelle Street. In their early rallies, they promised strikers that their every need, specifically food, would be met by the commissary, and free of charge. Since the striking workers were no longer getting a paycheck from the mill, this was a crucial safety net that could hopefully entice more workers to walk off the job. For you Vault subscribers, I've uploaded pictures of the commissary. Side note, there are a couple of Coca-Cola signs on the front of the commissary, which has always struck me as kind of funny. Some Coke marketing person hustling hard back in 1914. Funding for the commissary came from national labor unions and local donations. During the first week, word of the strike spread like crazy through Atlanta. and other low-wage workers began contributing to the Fulton strike. Electricians, cobblers, metalworkers, streetcar operators, and even union musicians donated what they could to help keep the strike going. Many of them believed that if this strike was successful, it would get the attention of the other factory owners around the city and forever change the fortunes of the low-wage workers. As support for the strike surged, so did the spirits of the striking laborers. During that first week, loud singing could be heard rising above Cabbagetown late into the night. Fueled by optimism and whiskey, striking workers would take the melody of existing songs and change the words, transforming them into trash-talking anthems directed at mill management. While the strikers were working the picket lines, Oscar Elsis was working on his plan. His initial response to the strike was actually quite chill. He was reported as saying that only a tiny fraction of workers had walked off the job, that the mill's operations had continued without interruption, and that this minor disturbance would be resolved in a few days. However, behind the scenes, he was anything but chill. As a matter of fact, we now know that Oscar had a sophisticated plan for how to respond to a labor disturbance just like this one. How do we know that? Well, gather round, my cat-lick companions. If you remember way back in episode 1, I told you about a vault sealed off and tucked away in the executive offices of the Fulton Bag and Cotton Mill. And I told you how, in 1985, some guys in hard hats opened up the vault and discovered a massive treasure trove of mill documents. I also told you how those same men tipped off Georgia Tech and how Tech sent a team of researchers and archivists to collect the documents. Here's a cat-lick throwback, all the way back in episode 1. For the next few months, the research team processed and cataloged the collection. Bit by bit, they began piecing together the cotton mill's mysterious past and its beginnings in 1881. Much of what they found was mundane, but not all of it. Hidden amongst the mundane details of employee pay records and budget reports was a dirty little secret. There was a reason these millionaire millmen kept their secrets behind lock and key. And for the first time ever, their secret was out. That dirty little secret was what researchers learned about the labor strike of 1914. Because Oscar kept meticulous records, he retained all the correspondence, including the private and confidential messages that occurred during the strike. Now, this might not seem like a big deal to you, but to historians, this is huge. When we study early labor strikes around America, we're usually privy only to the information from the Union side. We rarely get to pull back the curtain on the plans of the super-rich industrialists fighting against the Union. Using these thousands of recovered documents, historians have been able to piece together Oscar's strategy. The play-by-play of how a cunning, relentless, and wealthy factory owner planned to crush the uprising happening within the walls of his corporate empire. And oh, was he ever relentless? When they were sorting through the cache of mill documents in the 1980s, archivists made a peculiar discovery. A subset of documents filed under the mysterious heading, "Our Forces," in all caps. Inside this file were fragile and fading pages noted as operative reports. These were first-person accounts of life inside the mill. Sometimes they were handwritten and other times they were typed. But each report was anonymous and included a numeric identifier at the top. Operative number blank. So operative number 14, operative number 89, operative number 144, and so on. Curiously, there weren't just dozens or even hundreds of these mysterious dispatches. There were thousands of them. And that's when they realized what they were looking at. spy reports. Oscar Elsis employed an army of spies, surveillance operatives who worked inside the mill, furtively blending in amongst the regular workers. This force of covert chameleons acted as Oscar's personal spy agency, disclosing to him everything they heard being discussed when management wasn't around. Now, we're not sure of the exact number of spies Oscar employed, but estimates place that number at well over 100. And with that much manpower, Oscar could afford to have a spy for everything. He had spies in every department and division of his factory. He had spies for his managers and office staff. He had black spies tasked with snooping on the factory's 150 black workers. He also had spies outside the walls of the factory. Spies for keeping tabs on Atlanta police, spies to infiltrate local civic and social groups, spies who reported on local religious leaders, spies spying on other manufacturers, spies assigned to the various pubs and saloons frequented by factory workers, tasked with eavesdropping on company gossip after hours. Oscar Elsis even deputized the company's own doctor as a spy. Dr. Eugene Hawkins made daily house calls, checking in on those who were sick in the mill village. However, at night, he would file his own operative reports, passing along any intelligence he'd gleaned during his visits. Of course, the primary targets of Oscar's spying were the strike leaders themselves. He assigned special teams of spies to monitor and tail both Charles Miles and Ola Delight Smith. Appeals to morality were incredibly powerful in the early 1900s, and Oscar knew that if he could catch either of these two in some kind of scandalous situation, he could ruin them in the eyes of the public. Now, each operative was required to file a daily report. So when Oscar came in each morning to his office, spread out on his desk were dozens of these documents, briefing him on mill gossip, union strategy, and names of strikers. With his network of street-savvy informants in place, there was nothing Oscar did not know. And armed with that knowledge, he was more than prepared to go to war with his people. While employing an army of spies was a major piece of Oscar's strategy, it wasn't the only piece. Far from it. Oscar was also part of a confederation of mill owners that sent top-secret memos on union organizing efforts. He began consulting with this group the moment the strike began. Part of this was him seeking reinforcements, asking cotton mill owners around the state to send some mill hands to Atlanta to blunt the absence of the strikers. In his correspondence with these other mill owners, he warned them of what might happen if the Fulton strike was a success. This is a matter of great importance to cotton mill interests, to those in Atlanta, the state, and the Southeast. Charles Miles has stated that if he succeeds in organizing Fulton bag and cotton mills, he intends to organize each and every mill in Georgia. Later, he wrote this. If we succeed in whipping out this fight, we have reasonable assurance that Mr. Miles will go back north where he came from, and let Georgia and the South alone. If we do not whip it now, your time will come sooner or later. We shall therefore have to band together for our mutual protection. Oscar's message to his fellow mill owners was clear. Help me crush the strike now, or we'll all be afflicted by a pandemic of pro-union fever. On June the 3rd, Oscar took his messaging directly to the people of Atlanta. He did this with a giant ad in the Constitution defending the mill's actions. It was filled with employment and payroll statistics, which was very Oscar-ish in that regard. But he also declared his belief in how the strike originated. The striking employees, we think, are misled by persons who are not employees, and some of these strangers have never been in our employment and are not even citizens of this state. In other words, this is only an issue because Yankee agitators came down from the north and stirred up our otherwise happy employees. Right. The day after the ad appeared, Oscar's pleasant public tone took a 180 when he launched a vicious campaign of retaliation against the striking workers. His tool? Mass evictions. Remember, many of the workers at Fulton Bag paid rent to live in the shotgun houses of Cabbagetown, houses built and owned by the Elsis family. Oscar's logic was simple. If you're not going to work in my factory, then you're not going to live in my houses. So on the morning of June 4th, men on horseback charged into the mill, pounding on the doors of strikers, forcibly entering their homes and casting their belongings out into the streets. Observers reported total chaos, dogs barking and children crying while their desperate parents begged for mercy. We have lots of pictures from that day, thanks to one person, Ola Delight Smith. Smith maintained her own network of informants, and one had warned her of the coming evictions. She had a plan in place. When the chaos began, Ola Delight Smith muscled her way through the crowds with her Kodak camera in hand, snapping pictures of weeping mothers and barefoot children, knowing that the images would garner major sympathy from the locals. Following behind her was a professional photographer she'd hired to help document the suffering. Multiple times throughout the day, the company's hired thugs surrounded Ola Delight Smith, attempting to block her from taking photos. Nevertheless, she persisted. Smith and her photographer also sought out Cabbagetown's rising star in Fiddlin' John Carson. Remember him? Sure enough, they found him, evicted and standing on his front porch when they snapped his photo, fiddle in hand and his trusty hound dog by his side. At this point, most savvy activists of the day would have been content with two cameras working simultaneously to capture and document the bad deeds of the factory men. However, Ola Delight Smith wasn't like most savvy activists of the day. Unbelievably, she also booked a motion picture film crew to document the evictions in all its full cinematic glory. Now, this is wild because it's 1914. The film industry was in its infancy. Movies had barely been around for maybe 10 or 20 years. Yet Ola Smith recognized that with film, she'd be able to record the deeds of the bad men and sway public opinion. But Ola's film strategy wasn't just to document the scenes of the evictions. Oh no, she wanted to direct them. A fan of theatrics, Ola had given a very specific assignment to an older female striker, widow Margaret Dempsey. And now, it was showtime. With her belongings piled high on the street and her frightened son by her side, the cameras pointed their lenses at Margaret Dempsey and began rolling. One of Oscar's spies witnessed the whole scene, and in his daily report, recounted what he saw. It was arranged for her to make a speech and throw her arms up, and the son to go to his mother and try and comfort her, and she had to push him away. While this was in progress, the motion picture operator was giving instructions and told her to drop into a seat, then fall over as if exhausted. Are you getting this? This is crazy. In 1914, Ola Delight Smith is basically directing a propaganda film by herself in the streets of Atlanta. To say that this was a bold and audacious move is an understatement. When the chaos of Eviction Day died down, the numbers were in. 218 men, women, and children had been left homeless by Oscar's horse-mounted eviction force. As union leaders scrambled to find accommodations for the evicted, it became clear that the dramatic events of the day had actually helped the strikers' cause. The dramatic nature of the evictions was clearly designed to humiliate and shame them. When non-union workers saw this, it triggered a fresh wave of resentment towards mill management. Union enrollment surged as more Fulton bag laborers walked off the job. Within days, Ola Delight Smith had developed the dramatic photos and mounted them in the windows of retail shops around downtown Atlanta. Horrified Atlantans gasped at the sight of the downtrodden mill hands left destitute and homeless by the cold-hearted mill owners. Smith also arranged for other photos to be sent to newspapers and labor journals around the country in an effort to spread the word of this new Southern uprising. Just 2 days after the evictions, union leaders got some good news when a powerful civic organization backed their cause. The Men and Religion Forward Movement was a loosely organized group of evangelical ministers and Protestant businessmen that used their faith to war against moral decay while advocating for social causes. They thundered against liquor, saloons, and prostitution. And they were fiercely opposed to the latest moral scourge to invade Atlanta, Sunday motion pictures. This was a big deal back then, and the thought of people watching bawdy vaudeville films on the Lord's Day was anathema. In addition to their campaigns against vice, the Men and Religion Forward movement also took an interest in the welfare of low-wage factory workers. So when union leader Charles Miles pitched them on the cause, they listened. With a roster of wealthy and powerful leaders from around the city, Miles knew that support from the MRFM would be a major win. Well, if public support is what Charles Miles wanted, then public support is what he got when he opened the Atlanta Constitution on the morning of June the 6th. He saw a massive page-long feature topped by a giant headline, "Let us have justice." This was like a public service announcement from the Men and Religion Forward movement. Beneath the headline, lots of words comprising a dramatic narrative and a devastating takedown of the Fulton Bag and Cotton Mill. I'll post the full text of the bulletin in the vault, but here's a pretty dramatic excerpt. A hotel room. A man dead by his own hand. Without friends in the city, he was drinking. Beneath the window of another hotel, a huddled heap, a spreading stain upon the sidewalk. He too is dead, crushed by his fall. He had been drinking. All caps. 2 more men have this week died on the altar of alcohol and greed in Atlanta. Their search for happiness here is over. Their bodies cry out for justice for those who live. Who next? Strikers. Look to the east. There on the city's edge, 3 smokestacks tower above massive buildings. A great wall surrounds them. Glass and barbed wire run along its top. Above it, one sees a gaunt black bridge. Over it goes a group of children as the warning whistle blows. A little girl, not over 12, her pink dress fluttering against the grime, runs through a forbidding door to work. All caps again. She and they should be at play. Just over the way are those who neither work nor play. They sleep in Oakland Cemetery. Graves of the living are between it and the mill, dreary, drab, monotonously the same, row after row of houses. Behind them, sanitary conditions which are a menace to the city's health. Laborers live here. They have a grievance. Underlying it are many complaints. They struck. This screed then goes on to trash the mill owner, saying that they refused to submit to an impartial third-party evaluation of their mill. It also blasted them for not paying their workers a living wage. And then the bulletin closes with a bang. It begins in all caps. There are no problems in the graveyard over which the 3 stacks belch their smoke, but there are questions beneath their moving shadows which God will have you answer. The liquor problem. the question of brothels, the handling of prisoners, and the living wage are all but part of the same great question. The Spirit of God is abroad in the world, and men are crying for justice, and in the end, they will have it. Signed, the Executive Committee of the Men and Religion Forward Movement. That is a hell of a public service announcement, and it did not go unnoticed. Support for the strike poured in from around the city. In his book, Contesting the New South Order, historian Clifford Kuhn notes that craftsmen of all kinds, including local typographers, coat makers, carpenters, bricklayers, painters, and machinists, began sending in donations to help fund the strike and replenish the commissary. Things were looking very good for the strike and its leaders. Meanwhile, back at the mill offices, the public bulletin posted by the Men and Religion Forward movement only enraged Oscar Elsis further. Caught off guard by the bulletin, Oscar decided to double down on his espionage efforts. He devised a devious plan to hack into the heart of the union's sacred meeting space, the Oddfellows building. He charged two of his top informants with the task of stealing a key to the building. Author Clifford Kuhn tells us what happened next. The two spies then rented rooms across the street from the hall, purchased wire and other supplies, then, pretending to be electric repairmen, installed in the hall a detecto-dictograph surveillance device, a cross between a telephone and primitive radio technology. Despite occasional glitches, they were able to listen in on the union meetings from their vantage point across the street and provide verbatim accounts of the proceedings. Again, this is insane. We have a millionaire mill owner bugging the union's private meeting hall by hiding a recording device in the ceiling. For more than a week, the men listened in on strike meetings and produced detailed transcripts of everything that was said. This was a major source of intel for Oscar Elsis. However, after about a week, the machine malfunctioned, interrupting the union meeting with a high-pitched squeal. The union leaders retrieved the device and quickly realized they'd been had. The next day, in a speech to the strikers, Ola Delight Smith was outraged. She went off saying this: "The Jews, they're sweating blood. They're worried or they wouldn't have put in the dictograph." Now, sadly, this isn't the only time strike leaders used anti-Semitism to garner support for their cause. Charles Miles did it on several occasions as well. Remember, this is all happening with the Leo Frank story still fresh in the minds of Atlantans. The entire Frank fiasco had created incredible distrust between the city's poor, working-class whites and the city's wealthy Jewish immigrants, many of whom owned businesses around Atlanta. Strike leaders were quick to exploit that distrust when it served their purposes. By mid-June, there was good news and bad news on the strike front. The good news was that two of the top union organizers in America had been dispatched to Atlanta. Sarah Conboy and Mary Keller were experienced leaders with deep knowledge of how to grow and sustain a new union effort. They joined Charles Miles and Ola Delight Smith to create a four-headed monster hell-bent on victory. However, there was bad news as well. More than a month had passed since the strike began, and though there had been considerable progress, the striking workers were growing restless and at times volatile. In the streets of Cabbagetown, friction was growing between union workers who'd walked off the job and those who remained and kept working in the mill. The pressure on the remaining workers was intense, and there was drama all around. Reports of strikers roughing up non-strikers were common. On several occasions, workers living in the mill houses woke up to threatening letters left on their doorsteps. Now, I've seen these actual notes. I've held them in my hand. How, you may ask? Well, they all made their way to Oscar Elsis, who, you guessed it, deposited them directly into his vault. The handwriting on these notes looks like something from a serial killer, so they were obviously written by mill hands, people with little to no formal schooling. One of them said this: Walter Burdett, if you go to work in the Fulton Mill anymore, it will be at your own risk, so take warning. And don't go in the mill no more. Signed, a striker. During this same time, there were also rumors that strikers were plotting to dynamite the mill if their demands weren't met. We have no idea if this was ever an actual plan or just big talk, but I'm going to go with the latter. In addition to all this division in the mill village, there was also drama with the commissary. Remember, the vision of the commissary was that it would be a free social service to the strikers, a place they could come to get free food and supplies during their unemployment. Well, there was one tiny problem with that plan. It was easily abused, which kind of makes sense when you think about it. Work for pennies in a hellishly hot cotton mill for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week? Or don't work in a hellishly hot cotton mill and get free food from the commissary down the street. So yeah, as you can imagine, that became a problem. As more and more workers began abusing the system, the strike leaders began issuing stronger warnings. A rule was finally made that if you're going to be on the union's dime, you have to actually show up to daily picket lines. You actually have to be involved with the strike. June 28th, 1914, was an infamous day, globally, that is. Historians know that as the day that Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria was assassinated in Sarajevo. And this, of course, was the trigger that would eventually start World War I. Well, on that same day, back in Atlanta, a different story was playing out. That's the day that the Men and Religion Forward movement hosted a massive meeting at downtown's Grand Opera House. The title, or more like theme, of the event was Capital, Labor, Christ. It was a ticketed event. All throughout June, the Men and Religion Forward movement had been taking out public bulletins in the newspapers twice a week. Each of them took direct and indirect shots at the Fulton Bag and Cotton Mill management. The bulletins generated more citywide interest in the cause of the strikers, and MRFM leaders recognized this as an opportunity to broadcast their beliefs to a huge crowd at a big public event. More than 2,000 people showed up, which made this a major public gathering in Atlanta. At the event, multiple speakers took the stage. Some railed against the injustice of child labor, others preached about the inherent value of both the rich man and the poor man. And of course, the topic of the Fulton Bag and Cotton Mill was widely discussed. Group leader Marion Jackson assailed the mill for its predatory contract, its awful living conditions, and management's refusal to arbitrate with the strikers. This last piece was really the whole point of the rally, to apply pressure to Oscar Elsis to sit down and actually listen to the concerns of those who'd walked off the job. Marion Jackson, however, did himself no favors when in his speech he brought up Oscar Elsis's religion. In his attempt to compliment the Jewish race, he actually made several sly and stereotyping remarks that had a distinctly anti-Semitic tone to them. The rally ended with the group unanimously passing a resolution calling for mill management to enter into arbitration talks with the strikers. In the minds of those who attended, the rally could not have gone better. It catalyzed support around the cause and sent a message loud and clear to Oscar Elsis. Following the rally, Elsis responded with a public statement. After carefully considering the suggestion that we arbitrate our business affairs, we have decided there is nothing to arbitrate. While Elsis's public statement was dry and matter-of-fact, he was steaming on the inside. When his informants who attended the rally reported on what was said from stage, he was outraged. The mentions of his Jewish faith only confirmed what he'd suspected. This whole thing wasn't really about the strike. It was about the Jews. It was merely an expansion of the Southern Gentile crusade that had claimed Leo Frank as a victim and was coming for him next. The mass meeting held in the Grand Opera House, which, by the way, was a building funded by Oscar's father, Jacob, was a turning point for Oscar Elsas. He viewed the entire affair, Christian ministers railing against his family's business while 2,000 people cheered in approval, as a deeply personal attack. And Oscar was one to fight fire with fire. While his previous targets had been strike leadership, his fury now shifted towards the leaders of the Men in Religion Forward movement. And he was willing to do anything to take them down. His full vengeance was about to be unleashed. And part of that vengeance included the deployment of Oscar's secret weapon, a super spy, a highly trained one-man reconnaissance wrecking ball, a chameleon, and a silver-tongued snake. A Jason born before there was a Jason born. And when he stepped off the train at Atlanta's terminal station in June of 1914, this mystery man brought the full force of his elite skills in service to one person, Oscar Elsas. One historian has described him as one of the most, quote, remarkable undercover operatives in the history of American industrial relations, end quote. And if you stick around, you'll get to meet him. That's next time on Catlick. Our Catlick Live finale will be here before you know it. As I mentioned at the top of the episode, it's over 70% sold out. You've never been to a live podcast finale? Well, that's okay, because I haven't either. But I can tell you, we're going to have a blast. Meet us in Atlanta's historic West End neighborhood on March the 14th at Plywood Place for a fun night of history, mystery, and true crime. To get your tickets, just visit catlick.com. Oh, one more thing. Did you know we have 2 t-shirts inspired by this episode? It's true. The design inspiration of our Let Us Have Justice tees came from an old photo of a sign being held by one of the strikers during the Fulton Bag and Cotton Mill strike of 1914. Well, in honor of that gentleman and the fact that you've made it all the way to episode 19 of Catlick, we've got a little reward for you. Use the promo code 19NOW in the Catlick store to save 19% off the Let Us Have Justice t-shirts or any other tees in the Catlick store. That's 19NOW. The number 1, the number 9, NOW. That's your promo code. Of course, you can shop all the great Catlick merch at, you guessed it, catlick.com. All right, let's roll the outro music. Catlick is recorded in Atlanta's historic Cabbagetown neighborhood. Executive producer, Walnut Ridge Harmon. Original music and sound design by Duciel. Cover art by Rachel Eleanor. Catlick store manager, Brett Harmon. Research assistant, Jack Lindsay. Special thanks to the staff at the Georgia Institute of Technology Library, Archives, and Special Collections. Catlick Instagram follower of the week at KDB. Catlick Instagram commenter of the week at Gravel Grinder. Catlick Twitter follower of the week, Becky Olthoff. When it comes to all things Cabbagetown, we've got some of the best visual content yet waiting for you inside the vault. Tons of old photos from the strike, plus great photos from around Cabbagetown today. Be sure to subscribe to the vault at catlick.com. And finally, Catlick is independently written and produced by me, BT Harmon, signing off. I'd like to remind you to save old buildings, build bike lanes, and vote for public transit. We'll see you in the next episode.